Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
associated with the creation
or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked
and sometimes what didn't.
You will also hear very personal experiences
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
and inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person-years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. Today, as part of the Women's Special Series in March 2025, my guest is Veena Rao, SVP and Global Head of Corporate Lending at Finastra. With over 25 years of experience in financial services and banking technology, Veena shares a lot of insights from her experience, starting with her early influences and being adaptable, her education and career path, her philosophy about career growth, insights from her own leadership journey, and how to handle work-life integration aspects, on global experience and being sensitive to cultural nuances, and how she stays resilient and some personal practices that have been effective for her. And finally, some tips for aspiring women professionals. There are many insights from her experience embedded in this episode, such as leaders needing bifocal vision, the benefits of mindfulness practices, etc. Don't miss. Listen on. Yeah. Hi, Veena. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Hi, Shivguru. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's been a while since we connected, so I thought this is also an opportunity, for us to refresh our memories and also, understand what you've been doing. And as you know, this is part of the March series where we focus on women and then women-related. I wouldn't want to call them issues. Maybe I think some things that are probably unique to women or special for women. Right? So before we get into all that, we can start with a self-introduction where you can start with your origin story and how you got to be associated with IT and probably anything you've done before that. And then what has been your career trajectory?
Sounds good. So glad to be on the podcast today and very glad to share at least what learnings I have taken away from over 30 years of career, largely in banking and banking technology. So I'm pretty much a two-trick pony. I worked either in banking directly or in technology for banking, nothing much beyond that. Some of the key points I would say, if I were to go back to the point, even going into early youth, while I know today's podcast is more about career and women in tech, etc., and tips for careers in technology from a context of women, I think some of the early learnings that I had from my childhood have carried forth into my success and the journey that I've had in corporate as well. So I'd like to break down my entire journey maybe in 3 parts. So you'll see that I do have a theme to carry things in 3 parts because I think that's just a very natural way of how people remember things and how people can also slot them into logical buckets. So if I go back to my early youth, some points to take away from my early youth. My father was in the banking industry. Not surprised how I got into banking myself. So my father was in the banking industry. And in those days, if you remember, a career in public sector banks meant that you had to move every 2 to 3 years, right? There was no letting your grass grow under your feet. So every 2-3 years, there would be the proverbial transfer and the promotion and the transfer that came along with it. And I moved 7 cities, 10 schools, and several opportunities. But by the time I got to grade 12, I'd changed 10 schools. I'd lived in 7 cities. I'd learned as many languages and made as many friends. So I think some of the foundational aspects of my career journey also trace back to early childhood, where being adaptable to change, being open to new opportunities, being open to new challenges, because every time you move a city and a school, it is up to you as the person who's new in that school or in that classroom to make that first step, to take on a new challenge, to make a new friend, etc. Right? So you have to constantly break your comfort zone. It's not the same children or the same friends that I carried from nursery up to class 12. So I think that was a very foundational aspect of my career journey as well, being adaptable to change, being open to new challenges, being able to take on new things without really worrying about breaking my comfort zone. The second aspect of my childhood or my early youth is that I trained, interestingly, though I'm in technology today, I trained in finance, accounting, audit, taxation. So I'm a chartered accountant, I'm a BCom, cost accountant, and a US CPA. So all through my entire academics and my educational journey has been in finance and accounting. So when I talk to people and I tell them I'm in Finastra or in any technology company, they generally presume I'm in the finance function. So that's not true. I think academics or the educational background is just a stepping stone to the future career that your trajectory takes you on. So it's important to be flexible in that aspect as well. And some of the key takeaways that I had from my journey as an accountant is that eye for detail, and that's held me in good stead as I went through my entire journey. I think being able to spot and to be able to look at the details, at the same time be able to see the full big picture, I think that's an important trait for us to remember as we progress in our journeys. So that's the learning from the early part of my career, or early part of youth itself, not just career. Now let's switch track to the early to mid career. That's broadly where I lay the foundations for today where I am today in my career trajectory. I think for any aspiring career professional, male, female, doesn't matter, that early to mid career is the real foundation. And if your foundation is not strong, if you haven't done enough to learn and to become experts in certain areas that you want to work on, then the pillar or the buildings are not going to be as strong for your future. So it's important to lay a very strong foundation in your early to mid career. Be flexible, be open, pick up new roles, move roles every 2 or 3 years. So you pick up a new domain, a new skill, a new function, and round up your entire career profile or your skill profile is what I would say. So if I again look at my early to mid career, I started in banking and my first love continues to be corporate banking. That's where interestingly I've landed back today. I head up our corporate banking division in Finastra. And then I start off as a corporate banker in ICICI for about, again, 7 years and 3 roles. So you will see this pattern repeating quite frequently in my career trajectory. On an average, a role lasts about 3 years. I think that's about how much the role can take off me, or whichever way I think about it. So 3 years, and I break it down as first year, you need to learn. Second year, you need to start contributing. Third year is when you master and you start looking for your next role. So it's almost like you repeat this cycle of 3 to 3.5 years on an average, which helps to keep you up to date in your skills and also constantly moves your career forward in almost like a program management of 3-year tranches. So early to mid career, I spent about 7 years in ICICI, deep into corporate banking and then treasury, foreign exchange treasury. Also rounded it off with relationship banking. Then I moved on to technology, which was my first jump into technology, which was an iFlex. And that was my first foray into technology as a pre-sales person. Very, very interesting journey from moving from banking to technology, because you know how it is in banks. I think you're a banker as well. I remember from your background. Extremely structured. There are policies, there are documents, there is everything. There is an approval power, there is a process that you need to follow, operational guidelines, etc. So it's a very structured environment. From there, moving on to technology, which is almost everything is virtual, almost everything is unstructured. You do things based on the needs of the situation. Today you're a treasury expert, tomorrow you're a general ledger expert, day after you're talking about lending to a customer. So the ability to take things on the fly and to be able to mold yourself into a technology role was an important aspect of learning for me as I got into technology. And I remember moving from banking to technology was not an easy jump, but the good thing is that I did that fairly early in my life. So about 7 to 8 years is where I think you're still moldable. You have a wealth of experience from your first part of your journey, but you're still moldable to a new domain. If you wait too long, it's very difficult to make that move. The third aspect of my early to mid career was moving into the banking domain practice, and this is where I moved into a role in HCL Technologies, leading the banking domain. And also leading the payments practice. So at various points in time, I led an IP incubation team. When that was brought to a close, I moved on to the banking domain practice and then also a payments practice head role. And I remember when I was asked to take on that payments practice role at that point, my manager at that point in time said, you should take this role up. And I said, I've never done payments in my life. He said, it doesn't matter that you've never done payments in your life. I know you will learn what's required. So I think those are moments of learning for us. And that's when we need to flip that switch in our mind, saying, if I've never done it in the past, doesn't mean I can't do it in the future. So those were incredible learnings. And as we grow in our careers, it's important to have those right mentors, those right leaders who have that trust in us to be able to pick up something new and take on those challenges. So that's where my early to mid career is. And coming back to the third part of my career is the mid to senior career, which is where I think the kind of skills that we need as we grow into that level in a company, in a corporate world, is completely different. So it's no longer about technical skills. It's no longer about knowledge of banking. It's no longer about your ability to write an FSD or a technical spec document or get testing done, etc. It's no longer a technology or a domain or a functional skill that you're worrying about. Now you're changing your entire mindset into how do you lead large teams? How do you inspire people to come with you on a journey? How do you inspire a vision for the team? How do you lead teams and get them to deliver what you need to deliver for the organization that you're working with? So those aspects is what I honed in the last 7 years of my mid to senior career level, moving on from being a domain practice lead in HCL to ICICI/Finastra, where I am today. Again, moving on to product management for a core banking solution, then back to where I am today, which is corporate banking, leading the corporate banking division. And along this product management journey, again, I have taken on roles which have moved me from product to leading engineering to now leading product, engineering services and support. So entire spectrum of a customer's journey from the time a deal is signed till the customer is live in production and also supporting clients in production. It completely gives you a different view of the customer's experience with a company like Finastra. And that helps us to see the customer journey end to end. Because if you continue to be in your siloed verticals, you see your problem and say, oh, this is not my problem. And you flip it over to another section of the organization and they say, it's not my problem. So the customer journey tends to be very fractured. And when you come to this level as an organizational leader, that ability to see that story end to end and to bring the people onto a problem solution mindset without throwing the problem around too many times, I think that's a completely different level of skill. So broadly, what my takeaways are: different aspects of life, different stages of your journey. There are different aspects which are important and critical, and picking up those learnings and skills and carrying them forward and constantly adapting and renewing yourself as you move forward in your journey is very, very important. So broadly, that's how I would break down my career trajectory. I'll pause there for your questions.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Actually, you threw up a lot of questions or things that I would like to dive a little deeper. But just to clarify, I am not from a banking background. But if I was able to act like a banker, it is only because like I was also, I wouldn't say thrust into, kind of got into the capital markets and then had to understand what it was while talking to users and understanding the requirements and all that. Yeah. So first was, of course, this whole move from banking to IT. How was that shift?
I would say it was interesting and challenging. So interesting, extremely interesting, because in the early 2000s, which is when I shifted from banking into technology, technology was just getting into that curve of the hockey stick curve where the technology is bursting, banks are adopting it, and it's a completely new area or a career journey that you could pick up. So I think it's extremely interesting, and I'm very glad I made that pivot at that point in time. So that's the interesting part. So being able to use your knowledge or skills from a completely different side of the business to move on to a completely new career trajectory and to be able to take that knowledge across effectively. I think that's the important word, because it has to be effective. There's no point having a lot of knowledge sitting here, but if that other side of the house, which is really coding and developing and testing and shipping software out, is not able to understand or not able to derive what they need from you, it is not really successful. So I think the ability to translate that learning into something which others can understand and use at their level, it's almost like English translation, because as a product manager or as a business consultant or a business leader working with technology teams, you have to be able to bridge that gap. It's almost like learning or speaking to the customer in one language and being able to translate that to your engineering teams in another language. And that language, of course, is in a different level. It's no longer like English and Hindi or English and Kannada. It's about being able to talk business language and then to be able to translate that into technical terminology, right? So I think that was the really interesting part, and the ability to, if I go back to my early childhood, being able to move across cities, being able to learn new languages, being able to talk to somebody from your older friendship circle in a Marathi-like lingo, and you switch to now a different city and a different culture, and then you flip your lingo. I think the ability to do those kinds of things is where I think that part becomes very interesting. To be able to translate a very complex banking concept and to be able to tell the developer on the job saying, okay, this means this validation on the screen or this field, and this is how the workflow needs to go. I think that's really, really interesting. In terms of the challenging aspect of the job, like I said, I think going from a very structured and very defined kind of environment that we work with in banks, because when you join as a trainee in a bank, usually there are several processes that are already laid down. There are lots of operational guidelines. There's a lot of knowledge about how to do something, and you have seniors and you have managers, etc., who exactly know the process. And it's a very tutored kind of a journey into banking, right? So, but of course, there again, I had the benefit of working in one of the most innovative banks in India, which is ICICI, extremely well known for its innovative ability, extremely well known for its fast pace, and also for empowering senior women. You would see a lot of senior women kind of career stories and success stories in ICICI. And that's largely because it's a very, very strong meritocracy. So gender was not in the equation. You didn't really have to worry about glass ceilings. And a lot of empowerment happened right at the beginning of your journey. So if there's something interesting that you wanted to work on, you could put up your hand and say, I want to try that out. So every time when there was a new product, those were the days when we were moving from centralized operations to decentralization and regional and zonal offices. And I happened to start my career in the regional office, or zonal office as it was called, in Bangalore. And then a lot of the centralized pieces like the trade finance business, the supply chain finance, discounting business, etc., was moving to the more front office or the zonal offices. And that's when I would put my hand up and say, yes, I'm volunteering for this. And I would then pick up those skills and learn them so that I could expand my portfolio of product knowledge. So the challenge part for me when I moved to technology was this absence of very strong guidelines and operating pillars and operating guidance, which is there in banks. Suddenly, when you come into technology, it's a very, very evolving. And in 2000s, it was a very evolving field, as you would remember, right? So being able to take decisions on the fly, moving everything from being paper and file and physical documentation oriented to suddenly being put into this entirely virtual world where even RFPs, which are contractual or sometimes part of contractual responses, go entirely on email, go entirely on soft copies. And not much is documented in terms of what's right, what's wrong, what's to be done in an unusual situation. You have to then learn on the job and learn to make those decisions with the right amount of balance between risk and what knowledge you have at that point in time. So I think that was a challenging aspect. So I think over the next 3 or 4 months, as I settled into technology, things were a little challenging. But then, like I said, if you don't challenge yourself, if you stay in your comfort zone, you're never going to grow in that side of your career. So that's where I took it as a challenge and I moved.
Cultural aspect. Typically, other industries we say is very hierarchical plus. There are all these, like you said, the processes and things that are defined to a reasonably flat or being even on a first name basis with pretty much everybody and all that. Now, how was that shift?
So interestingly for me, that hierarchy part was not such a big deal because I was working in, like I said, in ICICI, and the culture was extremely open, even in ICICI in those days. Of course, there was a little bit more of the sir, and the senior people would be called sir, and first names was not very common. You would still say Mr. and whatever. And sometimes if the seniors were fairly entrenched in from the older generation, then you had to send an email, and then you had to go and knock on the door and say, I've sent you an email. And sometimes you would even need to help them or print out what you sent on an email and take it as a physical copy. So those were very interesting cultural nuances. But having said that, like I said, ICICI was extremely innovative and was always at the forefront of technology adoption. So there was a lot of learning, even though it was in the banking side of the business, it was extremely fast paced. It was very good learning. So that aspect was less of a problem for me. But I think the absence of paper trails, because I remember in the banking world, everything needs to be documented, everything needs to be signed. You have the powers, you have to make sure the signatures are okay. And then you take a photocopy and then you put that in the file and you put that in the filing room, etc., etc. So that part of the paper trail was completely absent in technology. And of course, as in technology comes in, you realize as you grow more senior in the technology business, you realize the pyramid is completely inverted. And more often than not, the people who are coming into the workforce today and who are probably 15, 20 years younger than you carry so much knowledge and so much skill that it's impossible for us to really, it's a question of reverse mentoring. And here again, that point comes in that as this industry evolves and you see new generation coming into the workforce, we have to be open to learn from everybody. It's not just learning from seniors anymore. It's about learning from our peers who come from different aspects or different skill sets are different to our own. It's also very often learning from the youth who have come into the workforce because they are working at that. They are first thing. I think the first thing is that they are coming with the latest in technology. So interestingly, IT is one space where the newer generation has probably much more skill and knowledge than those who have been in the company much longer. So being open to reverse mentoring is important. Second, I think just the IQ level has taken a dramatic shift over the last 2 generations. I think where we are versus where we are versus our parents' generation was probably this much of a change. But if you see where we are versus this generation, the upcoming generation, the gap has just widened in terms of ability to learn, ability to adapt, and ability to just deliver very quickly on very, very new concepts. No fear of the new, no worry about experimenting with the new latest in technology. The more excitement there's more challenge in the job, the more excited they are to stay on with you. So I think that is something which is very important to remember, that we have to be open to reverse mentoring, especially in the technology field.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. Because from banking, when you said you got into iFlex, it is again a product company, while at that time, many companies were more in the services business.
Yeah.
As a product company, you said you were in pre-sales, which also meant that probably the dreaded question of what is the ROI if I implement this, right? So how were you addressing that, or even today probably, because software is something you say it is all good and everything else, but the ROI question.
Okay, so that's interesting. You should ask me that about my pre-sales role. So pre-sales is one function where you have to have enough meat on the bone when you talk to the customer, when you showcase a system that they're expecting to or they're planning to buy. You have to bring across your expertise, your knowledge, your ability to build trust with them during the pre-sales cycle. And at the same time, you can't be extremely open about what's not supported, right? So it's a very fine line of being on that edge where you are exciting them enough to buy the software, at the same time not making false promises. Because if you make false promises, your colleagues in engineering and product and implementation are going to have a tough time. And that's what I'm seeing, of course, right now, that so many things get pushed across the fence once the deal is done. But I think that ability to be able to give the customer enough trust and enough knowledge about the software during the pre-sales cycle, yet be realistic about what it doesn't do and cannot do, it's important. And I think a larger part of the ROI topic now, in reality, when a bank implements a productized software, the cost of the product and the entire cost that the bank incurs is probably less than 20%. If you take any large-scale product implementation, the actual cost of the software license in reality is not going to be more than 20%. A lot of the cost that comes into that equation is the bank's own internal costs of their own teams working on the projects, their own program management capabilities, their own interfaces that they need to deliver in terms of integrating that software into their landscape, the test suites, the repeated test cycles, the run up to the go live in terms of compliances and readiness, etc., and the number of environments that they run. So all in all, a software go live project from a bank's perspective is a much larger number versus just a software number. So when we talk of ROI, we need to remember that we are a smaller part of the entire equation. But having said that, the best way to address the question of ROI is to bring forth the best practices that our software has undergone. Typically, in a successful product, you would have at least 100 implementations to talk about. Ideally, at least 100 implementations, if not more, right? So being able to distill the best practices out of all those implementations and having almost like a run book or a standardized implementation methodology is very key. And if we are able to convince the customer to take the product and adopt it as much as possible, rather than keep adapting and bending it back to what they're used to, that is where the trick of ROI lies. Because if you keep taking the software and bending it out of shape to suit what you were used to in the past, then you may as well stay with the old software that you're currently running. So that is something which, as a pre-sales consultant or as a pre-sales expert, you need to and be able to educate your client base that this is a product, this has got all the features that you need to run the business. You should try not to bend it out of shape and make it do exactly what you're trying to replace today. I think that is an important part of being able to do a successful consulting assignment. And of course, the implementation team, when it comes into the delivery phase, also should be able to hold that same line to be able to be a consultant or an expert or a guide to the implementation versus being an order taker. So you would understand where I'm coming from a services mindset to a product mindset is a very different game. Right. So services, typically you would stand and say, what do you want and how can I do it for you, versus saying, this is the best practice and this is how you should implement the software to get the best out of it. So I think that mindset change is very important, and being able to carry that through not just at pre-sales, but also into implementation is an important part of the ROI that the banks can get.
The other aspect is you've been associated with building solutions for the world. These are global solutions, and even some of the corporate customers would probably be distributed across multiple geographies. The issues are probably the characteristics of working with global customers or even globally distributed teams.
Yeah.
And in particular, are there any location-specific aspects for women that one needs to consider when working with the globally distributed teams? And if there are any stories of how you handle some of them, that would also be interesting for the listeners.
Lots of questions rolled into one. So I think you spoke about globally distributed customers and globally distributed teams, and then women angle versus location. So I'll have to take quite a few. You're right. The current role that I'm running, my day starts fairly early, and I do have clients right from Australia right up to the US. So it's a very, very distributed customer base. And the challenges of dealing with customers from early morning right up to late evening, the challenges could be different. But if you boil it down to the essentials of where customer problems and escalations arise, by the time you get to the level where I am, then it's typically escalation and customer management and stakeholder management versus really fixing a bug or working on a requirement, right? So I think what we need to learn as we manage large global portfolios, I think, is the ability, or not necessarily learn, because ideally this should have been learned earlier in the life cycle itself, is the ability to display empathy. I think there are two important parts. One is empathy. Second is building credibility. So I think if we are able to do these two things, one, when we say empathetic, it's really being able to put ourselves in our customer's shoes and understand where that escalation is coming from, understand where that anger or that frustration is coming from, and first being able to diffuse the situation by first being an empathetic listener. Very often what we do as we grow up our hierarchies is the first thing we want to do is defend, right? It is a very natural human instinct. When somebody throws something at you, first thing you do is you try to ward that off by defending. So I think one important learning that I have had over my last several years handling customers or dealing with customers, and usually when we say dealing with customers, since now I'm at the delivery and the product side of the house, it's more escalations and problems versus being the pre-sales consulting style side of the story. So first thing I would say is empathy, and what puts customers at ease or diffuses a very difficult situation to start with is first to understand and appreciate their problem, and being able to talk to them in the language and the level of empathy that they understand. Because coming from banking helps me in that aspect very clearly, because though I've been in technology for the last several years now, the roots are still very strongly in banking, right? So like I said, the foundational aspects of my career were in banking. So when customers bring up an issue, for example, when a very serious defect is raised and it has an impact on accruals or risk or financials or a fee that's being charged to a customer, being able to instantly put yourself in the customer's shoes and say, oh my God, this is where our bank will be hauled up by RBI or by the regulator because this is just not okay. Or if there is a deadline where they need to get multiple systems to go live together, and if they miss that window because we've not been able to deliver to our promise, it means a big impact on the bank's cost and the ROI that you mentioned earlier. So first important skill I think that we need to pick up in dealing with clients who are global is this empathy. Second, I would say is the building up the credibility or the trust factor. That is the simple human angle, which is saying what you do and doing what you say. So when you get into a customer call and you say, this is what I will do to solve the problem, being able to have that perseverance to see that entire thread through and not just finish it at the end of the call, send a minutes of meeting and hope the problem will go out by itself. It doesn't happen because there are so many people working with you to solve that problem. You're not alone in this whole journey. So being able to translate that importance right down to the last developer or tester who's fixing the issue or delivering that feature, they need to see the big picture as well. So being able to translate that promise you make in the call and make sure that everybody who's involved in solving the problem is understanding the importance of the criticality and the nature of the promise that we've made, and then delivering back to the customer on time and on quality is very important. And doing this repeatedly over multiple cycles builds you that trust and the credibility. So that next time they have a problem, it's not an escalation. They're going to come and tell you, you know what, I'm seeing this is happening. Can you help me with it in advance? So I think empathy and credibility are the two things that we need to work with when we're dealing with global customers. And this is global. This is regardless of which geography you deal with. Now, there's a nuance of certain geographies, and I don't want to name names, but there are a couple of geographies where I have seen that it is sometimes very difficult to build that trust. And when you first try and build that trust, there is a lot of pushback and there's a lot of angry conversations. There can be a lot of angry sentences or words thrown in on calls, which can happen. So being able to be resilient at that time and not react, but to respond. Because like I said, if you have empathy, then you learn how to respond versus reacting on calls or reacting to strong messages or strong conversations, which are probably less than what is called professional. I think there are a couple of geographies where such conversations do happen. So being able to be resilient and responsive is important. There's another geography where a lot of handholding is required in terms of being there in person. So regardless of how good a quality or how good a job you do remotely, if you're not there in front of them during that critical phase of go live or switching on or pre-production or whatever it is, they're just not comfortable. So being humanly present in that location with them is very critical. So for such customers, we do have to be able to have that leeway to say, okay, don't worry, you're going live next weekend. We will send our best consultant for the next 2 weekends so that you're being seen through the critical phase. So having that flexibility to deal with a specific nuance of that kind is very important. So those are the questions I answered on the customer side. Now, global teams, I think the whole world today, especially after COVID, has become so global and so easy to work with across time zones and in terms of technology adoption, which is there to help us deal with the employee relationships across the time zones, across geographies is less of a problem. I don't see that as a challenge anymore, especially after where COVID has brought us today, right? So the evolution of Teams or Zoom calls, the ability to do nearly face-to-face kind of conversations is good. Having said that, I think some of the things that we need to remember as leaders, especially as we have large globally distributed teams, is to be mindful of time zones. And when we set up those meetings and set up those calls, presuming that people are available, presuming that they are able to do an early morning call or a late evening call, for example, I think that's something which we need to be very, very conscious as leaders. So quite often my teams know that if I am saying that I need a call at this time, they're very welcome to say, no, this doesn't work for me. So being flexible and open and approachable with your teams so that they understand that you understand their nuances. So for example, I have a young woman in my Bucharest office and she does need to take some time off in the middle of the day to pick up her kid from school and bring her home or whatever. And we are very mindful of such situations. It doesn't matter. She's catching up on either end of the spectrum. So outcome matters, output matters, less strict rules around times, and you log in at 9 a.m. your time and log in only at 6 log out at 6 p.m. Such kind of hard and fast rules don't work, especially in the industry that we are in today and the global customer base that we serve. So being cognizant of that and being mindful and being open with your team to give them that flexibility is very, very important in dealing with globally distributed employees. The last aspect you asked me was about women. Now, personally, I have never let that gender come into the equation. So personally, it's my point is, if you signed up for an occupation or a job or a profession, then give it your best. And ideally, it should not be a gender-led situation at all. But of course, there are certain nuances. Sometimes, more often than not, it's usually in the Middle East where you may find such challenges. If you have to visit a customer, you might have challenges making a visa or getting in there alone or unescorted, as it's called. I've had that kind of a situation many, many years ago. And interestingly, getting a visa as a married woman, but not accompanied by a male counterpart from the family, was a very kind of an unusual situation. But I did get a visa and I did visit them. And I happened to be the only woman in the room talking to them about foreign exchange, doing a demo on foreign exchange features of our software. So but what I've realized, Shivguru, over time is that once you are in the room and you're talking and you show that expertise or your knowledge, all the rest of it just fades into the background. Then the gender doesn't come into the equation at all, unless, of course, it's a very different milieu. But I have generally not faced that kind of a situation in a way that it's deterred me.
Okay. I have a follow-on question on that a little later. But a couple of points based on what you said is, we do talk about these high and low context cultures where the need for the high touch or lower touch, and even the choice of words, particularly when somebody is agitated, probably requires a lot of things. But on the lighter side, when you said that you're handling customers from Australia to the US, and since you're also a chartered accountant, the logo of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, you know what it says at the bottom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it says Esha Sukteshu Jagrati. Okay, which means somebody who is not awake and alert even while asleep.
Yeah.
So probably you need to be that 24/7. Yeah.
True. Beautiful. Thank you for reminding me of that. I haven't paid much attention to that logo yet in the last few years. I've been carried away in the technology tide.
Yeah, I always remember that line from what chartered accountant is supposed to be. The eyes and ears, and then what keep a watch
alert even when you're
how
asleep.
the entire organization runs.
That's actually, like I said, that's that training, that 3 years of rigorous training that the CA curriculum imposes on you, and the articleship training that you undergo at that time stands you in very, very good stead, even in the long run. So, though I never studied to be a computer science engineer or a technology person, I think just that ability to go into the detail, to be able to be alert, to be able to spot things which can be potentially risky, etc. That is a skill which has really stood me in good stead over the years.
Yeah, nice. So the related aspect, you did touch upon being responsive rather than reacting and all that, which is also something that we find a lot of leaders need, that kind of an orientation or some kind of a, let's say, immersion in a way. The shift from dealing with numbers to dealing with people, how was that for you?
I don't think I've stopped dealing with numbers. I think over time you just add. You don't really drop anything. So if I were to go back to what kind of skills we need as we grow into the senior leadership levels in the organization, I think you need to constantly, I would say, I have 3 examples of this, and maybe I will use those 3 examples. One is bifocal vision. And being in the same age group as me, you would understand when you have bifocal, it means you should be able to see far and yet focus on what's near, right? So you need to have this bifocal vision all the time, where you're able to see where the company needs to go, what the strategy is, or where do we need to be in 2 years, 3 years from now, what should we do now, etc., to get there. At the same time, if you are not able to translate that down to tactics and detailed number plans and detailed targets and detailed P&L and ROI. In fact, just before this call, I was on a call to review the business case with all to do with numbers, right? So the ability to go far and to come back and see the near is very, very important. So this bifocal vision. So just because now I'm wearing glasses and I can see far well doesn't mean I drop being able to read a book, right? So that's very, very important. So that's, as a senior executive, you have to have that. Second is what I call float and dive. So as senior leaders, we need to be able to float on the surface of a swimming pool, making sure everything is quiet and calm and nobody is in trouble and the lifeguard is doing what he or she needs to do, etc. So floating when things are okay and running as BAU is fine. But when there is a challenge, being able to deep dive and pick up that issue at the bottom of the pool and pick up that issue at the bottom of the ocean or wherever it is, whatever you want to use as the analogy, being able to deep dive and go to the bottom and fish the problem out and being able to stay up when it's not required. I think that's the second important skill that we need to pick up as senior leaders. So float and dive is what I call it. The third thing which I would call it is like a rubber band. My famous example is rubber band. So in natural state, if you don't need it to stretch, the rubber band is completely relaxed. It is just in its normal, smaller icon, this kind of a shape. And when you need it to hold a package together, which is much more than its current default size, it is able to expand and go around the box, right? And you take it out of the box, more often if it's a good quality rubber band, it will reasonably come back to its original size and shape. So that rubber band capability is stretching to execute and collapsing to relax. If you're able to do these three things, I think then you're able to master and stay on top of this reaction versus response kind of ability.
Wonderful. So far, we've been talking more about the work side. So how do you balance work and home?
So I think if you have a passion for what you're doing in your life, right, whatever it is, whether it is at home or in your work life or wherever your career, whenever you're excited and passionate about what you do, it's never an issue about trying to balance. The word balance comes in only when internally what your heart tells you should be doing and your mind is actually doing at that point in time. When they're out of sync, then you feel that you're not feeling balanced, right? There's this uneasiness or this disease in your mind or in your body which says, oh, this is too much or this is too little or this is too whatever, right? That balance comes in only when you're not aligned in terms of internal and external. If you love your job and if you love your career and you love your home equally, you will find enough time and enough energy in your life to give it the attention it deserves. And this is not a balance. It's not like every day I need to spend 5 hours on home and 5 hours in office. It's not about dividing your life into compartments and saying it has to be equally divided at every point in time. This balance comes in a way that at times when you have an important priority at home, being able to switch off and pay attention to what's requiring your attention at home, and correspondingly everything's running fine at home, there's a crisis at office, being able to give it your 100% at that point in time is good enough. And if you love both your home and your job, then there is no dis-ease or unease inside your system. So there's no need to constantly think about balancing things, right? Because you automatically balance based on you're putting your attention at the point where it deserves attention. So that's how I personally talk about work-life balance. And interestingly, of course, when your kids are young and they're in school and they have forgotten their Monday morning homework and there is a crisis on Sunday night, those are situations which all of us have to go through, right? That's the joy of parenting. That's the joy of having a family. And that comes with its own challenges. But there are equally good things in work as well, which are rewarding on their own. So I personally think there is no need to compartmentalize these two. Today, more often than ever, working from home, our days are quite long in terms of we start early because we don't have to drive to office. We're not spending 2 hours in the car or whatever. So we end up starting earlier as well. But at the same time, it gives you the flexibility. Maybe at 12 o'clock, you have an errand to run. You can go out and run the errand and come back and still catch up, right? So I see it more as work-life integration versus work-life balance. And so long as your mind and your heart are doing what it loves and it's in sync, it doesn't matter. You don't really feel out of balance at any point.
Yeah, that's nice because I increasingly hear this work-life integration as the way to look at all these things. But
I just like to add one point here, though,
Yeah.
and specifically since the topic is about women and career, and I think this is where many women do tend to fall into the trap of wanting to be super women. So they want to be super women at home, they want to be super women at work, and they also have this incredible guilt about not doing enough for their family, etc. So my only 2 tips of advice to the younger women who are listening, hopefully, to this podcast is: 1, don't try to be super women. Choose top 3 or 5 things like the 80-20 rule. What is that 20% which gives you that 80% joy in your day-to-day life? Focus on that 20%. The rest 80% is noise. If you can delegate, delegate. If you can outsource, outsource. Just like we don't do everything in the world as an industry, right? We chose technology. We chose banking for technology. We don't do insurance. We don't do manufacturing. We don't do retail. So what you don't do in your life or what you choose not to do is as important as choosing what you want to do. And once you've made that choice, stay with that choice and give it your 100%. So I think that's one small tip for our younger women. Don't try to be super women everywhere in your life. That's one important thing. Second, guilt. Guilt is one thing which just kills the ability to deal with the situation and give your 100%. So guilt is not to be in the equation. And it is important, I think, as parents, both parents are important. Family support is important. Building your own ecosystem and network of support is important. And once you've built that, I can guarantee you children will grow up quite well, even without us. Not saying that they should grow up without us. All I'm saying is the mothering aspect of our culture traditionally has been extremely overplayed. And I think it is important as mothers to also find balance about mothering itself. So I think that's guilt is not to be in the equation, because the guilt automatically depletes your ability to pay attention to your job and to your home, both. So that's just 2 pieces of advice for women who are listening.
Very wonderful, sounds simple, and I think very effective. And that also kind of answered a question that I had in mind. But a related thing is usually in the office setup, you have a lot of support systems. And you also talked about having some mentors, who could do that.
Yes.
How can one kind of manage that, particularly in these days of nuclear families? Having a support system so that the guilt feeling is not there or can be reduced to a significant extent.
Right. So I think you again combine 2 questions. One is mentors, which is where I think is more getting the right mentorship in office and being able to get the right support for your career. Second is getting more support at home, right? So let me answer, unless I've misunderstood, please feel free to correct me if my understanding is wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm saying in the office context, you have all those things.
Yeah.
Sometimes fairly well defined in larger organizations.
Right.
But startups, of course, have a different set of challenges.
Yeah.
Something similar on home front or on the personal front. Yeah.
Understood. Okay, thanks. I think things have changed quite a bit, Shivguru, as I've seen over the last 20-25 years. The cultural shift in our youth today is very clear. It's less about expecting one gender to do all the heavy lifting in terms of work at home or childcare or taking responsibility for the family in general. I see the generation which is coming into the workforce today. I think both partners support much, much more than this was common in my parents' generation. Of course, my parents' generation was a different social situation, right? And they did have this almost division of responsibilities. Everything outside of home and earning was done by one gender, and the other gender was largely looking after home and kids. But over my generation, things started to get a little more blurred, and then the balance was yet to get completely restored. But I think in the newer generation, as I see it, there's a lot more sharing, a lot more awareness about responsibilities at home, especially when both spouses are working. So that is, I think, the first step. Second, I think we as women, women and families in general, when we bring up our children, being able to instill that culture in their minds as they are growing up is very important. If at home, as they're growing up, they don't see this kind of sharing of responsibilities at home, they're going to grow up with that same older mindset, right? So being able to provide both our daughters and our sons the right attention and the right opportunities, regardless of gender, sets a very, very big example for them to follow when they grow up in life and so grow up later on. So that's, I think, the second important aspect of how we bring up our children. Third, I think, is to also being able to have the social network. Now, it could be parents-in-law, it could be parents, it could be any other form of relatives, or it could be a combination of relations and external support like maids, or it could be a fantastic daycare, etc. So there are enough ways we can build out our support system. The trick which has worked for me is always, Shivguru, is to have plan B. As working mothers, it's very, very important. If you have to be able to work with 100% focus and give it your entire attention, you always have to have plan B, because there will be occasions when the school bus is missed. There will be an occasion when the child falls sick unexpectedly. There will be occasions when you need to travel, right? So you might need to travel at unplanned occasions as well for a very critical customer meeting. So always being able to muster up plan B has been my mantra, and that is what has helped me. So whether it is my parent, my mother was very, very supportive as my kid was growing up. Similarly, when if there was an issue with my son missing his school bus, I always had 3 numbers handy on my phone that I could call and say, you know what, my son's missed the bus, could you pick him up? So I think, and not doing this as a one-way street. So it's not always one side, right? So building networks is all about doing it for each other as well. So I think that's important. Investing in networks where it is working for others as well, not just one-way street, is important. So bringing up all of those social networks that you can bring to bear, being able to enlist your spouse and your immediate family and also the extended family. Plus, of course, today there are more options for daycare and well-monitored daycare and house help, which we can bring to bear. So I would say that is what we should go with. And if you go with the mindset that my career is important, you will find ways to make plan B happen. If you're constantly thinking this is a choice and I will give up at the drop of a hat because, you know what, the school bus got missed 3 times in a month, that is the wrong way to make a decision. And that is where I see sometimes the wrong parameters being used to make a continue or drop decision when women drop out of the career and the workforce.
Yeah, it's been wonderful, Veena, with a lot of things. So I'm not going to ask one of my favorite questions on career tips because I think you already shared a lot of them. But I will still ask you one question. So Veena, handling all these different things and then being pretty much on 24/7, are there any personal practices that help you stay grounded, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, maybe I can share 2 personal practices. One, I think, is the most important one, which is about developing a practice which helps us to stay mindful. Because if you ask me, stress is a very simple equation. It is the pressure of the external situation divided by internal resiliency. And the lower the denominator, the more the stress, of course. We all know fractions, right? So the lower the denominator in that fraction, the higher the amount of stress you feel in your life. So the trick is the external situations are far beyond our control. Situations are going to come at us, like it or not. Some may be pleasant, some may not be pleasant, but they are going to come with regular frequency. So the only way we can change that stress equation is to build out the denominator, which is our internal resiliency or our internal strength or our ability to deal with that situation. And for me, the best way to handle that is to develop a very strong mindfulness practice. And in general, we think these practices are meant for post-retirement. But believe me, the time in life where we need this practice most is when we are in our early 30s, when we have those multiple pressures, whether it's young kids, whether it's home, whether it's office, you're just about taking off in your career, you want to invest and give it your best. So those are the times when you need that strength, internal strength to be developed. So for me personally, meditation has worked wonders, and I've been running with that practice for over 25 years now. So it is something I strongly recommend. It doesn't necessarily have to be meditation. It can be any other form of mindfulness practice. I know some people love running. Running itself can be extremely mindful if you do it in the right way. Similarly, music or involved in any kind of hobby, which basically allows you to switch off your thinking engines. In short, right? So that is what I would encourage the younger generation to follow as they come into the workforce. And not doing it once in a while when you go to retreat and come back and you think you arrived and you have done it, but it means the discipline of doing it every day for the next 20, 25 years. That's what I would recommend. Second is to develop a form of hobby or any other kind of skill that you want to pick up outside of your day job, right? Invest in that. And that skill can be completely unconnected to what you're doing, but you never know where that skill will come handy. So for me, simple example is I picked up learning a new language over the last few years. And it was nice for me to hear you speak in Sanskrit. So that's the language I've started picking up over the last 3 to 4 years. I try to spend my weekends learning a new language. So especially as we come to a stage where just the pressure of doing your day job gets high, it's important for us to recharge our brains using something which is a completely different kind of a skill. And it could be playing an instrument, it could be learning a new language, It could be going out and playing a game of golf if you've never learned golf in your life. Something different, something which you've always held back and not done in your life. It's a time to pick up a good hobby which takes you in a completely different direction. So those are my 2 personal tips.
So on that note, thanks a lot, Veena, for sharing a lot of very useful perspectives and also tips that have worked for you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, to do so. Thank you. Bye. Thanks, Shubha.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.